the left, or the little microphone icon looks like a little radio microphone, an old-fashioned microphone down in the left-hand corner of your Zoom screen. Or if you cursor over your picture, your image, there's an unmute button that pops up. If you happen to be on a telephone, you can unmute yourself by doing *6. And if none of that's working for you, just gesticulate wildly and we'll get you in. And of course, you can always use the chat feature. If you look down on the bottom, there's a chat little button, and you can chat to everyone or just to individual persons. I believe we're recording. Yes, we are. This session is being recorded, so just know that if you do chat to individuals, it's private during the meeting, but it's public on the recorded version. So, so far, no one has said anything embarrassing in a private chat, so that's good news. But that's a good thing to know. So I'm just going to say hi, everyone, in the chat. And hopefully you can see down there in the little chat that a message popped up. So I'm going to start with a brief devotion, and then Chris Ternier, our Director of Communications and Events and First Third of Life Ministries, pretty focused on communications lately. Not too much happening in the way of events. And First Third of Life, I know she's been doing busy keeping folks connected there. But she'll be the keeper of our agenda, so because she remembers things and I don't. So I'm going to get started here with the devotion, and let's not have anyone envying my fancy reading classes here. I know you all want a pair just like them, and I'm not even going to tell you where to get them because I want to be the only one that has them. But this is from a devotional called Strength for Service. You'll see this one's kind of old and beat up. I've had it since my first deployment back in 2006. And this devotional was first published during World War II. And it's been a very popular one, so it's continued in print ever since. And the language is lofty, as you can imagine from that era. But I think today's devotion for May 4th was quite appropriate. And there's a quote from Luke 1:78, and it is from the song that Zechariah sings when his mouth is finally open. No, wait, it's from Simeon's song, when Simeon recognizes the Messiah and the baby Jesus. And the dawn from on high shall shine upon us. That's how it goes in our Revised Standard Version. But in the version that's here, it is a little different. The day spring from on high shall visit us, from Luke 1:78. He goes on to write, Luke tells us in poetic language that God promises us the dawn of a more cheerful world. There is a physical dawn and there is a spiritual dawn. Shakespeare says, night's candles are burnt out, and jocund day stands tiptoe on the misty mountaintops. The Hebrew prophet foresees that God will win and justice triumph at the rising of the Sun of Righteousness, with healing in its rays. In gloomy, world-shaking periods, Christians look forward to the dawn of a brighter age. An early Christian leader said of Jesus, he has changed sunset into sunrise. A person of modern faith affirms, God's day ends in dawn. It is high time that we recover the assurance of religion that night never speaks the last word and that dawn is irresistible. Civilians and members of the armed forces, through their devotion, courage, and vision, can earn the honored title, Bringers of the Dawn. Let us pray. O God, who canst change darkness into radiance, grant unto us companionship with Christ and with all the dawn bringers throughout all the ages. In duty, in danger, in human relationships, and in quiet moments, Empower our comrades and ourselves to see thy light of truth and goodness. Establish in us sure vision and unfading faith. In the name of Christ, our leader, the dawn which comes from on high. Amen. Well, good evening. And God bless you. God's peace be with you. It's good to be with you. Chris, are you out there?
I am here.
Yay.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to share with you a couple of resources, and then Bishop Bill will dive deeper into some of them. Or should I just talk about one and then you talk about that one? How would
Sure.
you like to do it, Bishop Bill?
Yeah, we can do it that way.
Okay. So here is, make sure that I have the right page. I have a lot of things open. So on our homepage, I finally got a new banner up. It's Give at Home Minnesota Week. It started last Friday. We will be talking about that, but I want to first go to our COVID-19 resources. The first thing on here to share about is if you haven't done the Paycheck Protection Program yet, the ELCA Federal Credit Union is now, you can borrow through them. And so we have a link here on our thing and how to do it. And you don't have to be a current member of the credit union. It's a pretty quick process. So yes, anything about that, Bishop Bill?
Yeah, I will just say thank you for reminding us of this, Chris. So the ELCA became an approved SBA lender through the ELCA's savings. What do you call it again? Federal Credit Union, and they did that because there were congregations that were being denied, and that was almost always because lenders did not understand the program, or because in some cases congregations were just really struggling to fill out the application properly. And so just in the 1 week that the ELCA Federal Credit Union has been an approved lender, they've already done over $5 million in loans. And so if you were not approved, or you know of a congregation near you that applied and for whatever reason was denied, please highly encourage them to use the ELCA Federal Credit Union, because they will work with congregations and church organizations to ensure that they are successful in their application. That's what I got.
Perfect. And so this, again, if you haven't seen it and you need more information about the Paycheck Protection Program, this is a good, solid 15-minute video to help get you rolling with that. The next thing I want to lift up is something we shared about last week as well. The Northwestern Minnesota Synod Resilient Communities Grant application. It's something that I'm really excited to hear stories of how it's used. Yeah, Bishop Bill, would you like to share anything more?
Sure. It's a pretty simple, straightforward application. There are some benchmarks. If you want to go back to the first page, Chris, there are some benchmarks that we identify under grant purpose, but do not, if you look at those benchmarks and you feel like, well, not very many of those apply to us, still please apply. We are getting a lot of applications in, and right now we have $15,000, and we're hoping to have another $15,000 through the Minnesota Gives at Home campaign. And so these are grants of $1,000, and in some cases, larger grants would be considered if you have a large infrastructure investment you need to make. But it's to improve your technological capacity, your ability to bring online services, worship and other services to your community. And so I hope you'll apply. You can scroll down a little bit now, Chris. And then, so if you see here, very straightforward application, just one pager. you can write 100 words, but 100 words won't be necessary to convince the review committee to approve your grant. So we hope that you'll make good use of this, and we hope that you'll be generous with Minnesota Gifts. Do we want to talk about that next?
Yes, I'll go back to that. So Give Minnesota happens in the fall, but they're doing a special plea for this spring during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we just started, and we're challenging different groups of people, different days. So Friday we kicked off and we had 100% participation of our Synod staff giving, kind of got the ball rolling. And so tomorrow, we want to challenge you guys, the council presidents, for giving. Pastor Keith, our DEM, and I were working today on figuring out some incentives for the higher percentage rate of conferences that give. And so your gifts are all important, any size, but we would love to hear the stories of why you would give. And so on our Synod's Facebook page, there's a pinned post up top with a link on how to get to this. But if you go into Give Minnesota and type in Northwestern Minnesota ELCA, you'll get to this page as well. And I'll be posting more stuff on our social media and our e-newsletter this next week. But we would love to be able to give out as many grants as possible for the community resilience, and we can do that through money raised on this campaign.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And so tomorrow is your day, President's Day, and hope that you'll log in and give a donation of any size. And I want to just state that I understand that for some of you, your capacity to do so is greatly limited because of work job changes, and please don't feel obligated to do so. But for those of you who are able to and see it as an opportunity, we hope you will, because half the dollars will be used to go towards that Resilient Communities grant. The other half will be used to continue to underwrite our Synod operations, which, as you know, and as we have reported, are somewhat behind from previous years for obvious reasons. So we hope that you'll participate. So questions about anything we've talked about so far? Okay. Where are we going next, Chris?
To your letter from today that got emailed out. You guys probably saw the email since you're on this call, but Bishop Bill wrote a letter that got sent out. I'll share that.
Actually, Chris, why don't you let me share? I think I've got it ready to go here. I think I do. Let me just try it once, see. Yep, there it is. So let's see if I can expand this a bit. So folks, I sent this letter out today, and this is, you're going to get 2 communications from our Synod office in the next week to 10 days, starting with this one. And this one is really to set the stage for some of the affirmations or understandings that I think are important as we think about regathering, right? So one of the main things I'm trying to convey in this letter is that we're really not close yet to being able to do so. It's still a ways off. And I think to illustrate that, I think the best thing for me to do would be to share another screen here. Let me just try sharing. I think it's here. Yeah, here we go. We'll just share I think I've got it up. Maybe not. Hang on a sec. Just give me a second here. So can you all see this? Opening up America again. Are you seeing that? Give me a thumbs up if you're seeing it. All right. So this is the White House's and CDC's plan for opening up America again. The Minnesota has not yet released its specific guidance as it relates to faith communities, as Wisconsin and North Dakota have, because those two states are just a little ahead of us in the process, in their timeline, in the evolution of the pandemic. Has nothing to do with the leadership here in Minnesota, has everything to do with just the way things are unfolding. But all of the guidance that the states produce will be based on this guidance here, from the CDC. So the main thing here is to understand the criteria. So here's what's going to happen. It's going to be a phased approach, and phase one will begin when the gated criteria are met, which are, let's see, where's that? Phase guidelines. I just had the criteria in front of me. Well, the criteria for phase one are, okay, here they are. The proposed criteria for phase one are that there would be 14 days of a documented downward trajectory in symptoms, or reported cases, and or a downward trajectory in positive tests as a percentage of the total number of tests. So for example, here in Minnesota, we've seen a lot of increase in positives lately, but that's because we're testing a lot more, which is a good thing. Robust testing is a key to opening. But we haven't come close to seeing a 14-day period in which that trajectory of that percentage of positives is going down. So phase one will begin in different regions, and it's already beginning in some places because that's already happened. But when there's been a 14-day period where there's been a downward trajectory of documented cases. And when phase one begins, then basically phase one looks a lot like what we're in right now. Groups of 10 people or less. Now, what's different is that those 10 people can be regular parishioners, or they can be people gathering for a wedding or a funeral. It doesn't have to be just the people that are there to produce worship services. But a lot of the same restrictions would still be in place with phase one. Phase two begins when you've got 28 days, a lunar month, with a regular downward trajectory in those cases, and no resurgence. So that's when phase two starts. Phase two is when we start to get back to something where we can actually have congregations that are worshiping again, because their gatherings of up to 50 are allowed. And still with 6 feet of social distancing, high risk, still encouraged to stay safe at home, and still practicing sanitation, the wearing of cloth masks, all of those practices would still be in place. So we are working now to produce some guidance for how do you do this as a church? How do you do communion safely? How do you have a safe worship service? And it will be quite detailed, and in each place, it'll be a little different. So you're going to have to think about this as leaders together. And I'm asking that you not leave this up to one person. Hopefully they're not leaving it up just to you as the president. Please don't leave it just up to the rostered minister. It should be a team and a collaboration. And ideally, you would have some, what I'm calling a smart team. And what I mean is people that are smart about public health matters. So doctors, nurses, people who work in first responders or public health, that would be a part of that team. Phase three is when we get to where we can pretty much gather in larger numbers. That's when we get to four. At that point, we will be at 42 consecutive days of a downward trend when we can enter phase 3. And so phase 3, but still, even during that time period, physical distancing is highly recommended, minimum exposure, taking the precautionary measures. High risk populations should still be cautious. And so I guess I'm showing you this now because I think that it's important to understand that we're still a ways, we're not close to getting things back to normal the way they were before March 14th. And so what I have shared here in this letter is, first of all, that we all understand that, but then some affirmations. We're doing this because it's a matter of our faith and our values. Our faith is that God loves this church more than we do. God's word is powerful and active, whether it's coming to us from YouTube or from a pulpit. And so we don't have to be guided by fear and anxiety. Also, our values of faithfulness, authenticity, and love that makes a difference in the life of our neighbor. That's why we're following these stay safe at home orders. Many of you, like me, are probably not personally afraid of catching the disease. Some of you may be if you're in the high risk category or have underlying conditions. But I think most people feel like if I got it, I'd probably be like getting the flu and I'd probably be okay. Or I'd be asymptomatic. But I wear my mask when I go out in public, and I wash my hands a lot because I want to make sure that my vulnerable neighbors are safe. So the next affirmation is that the risks are real. I don't know if you noticed, but one of the milestones I've been watching carefully is 65,000. And this is because I argue with my daughter, right? My daughter is like all about, we need to get things opened up as fast as possible. And I agree with the as possible part, as fast as possible. But so early on, I think a lot of us said, well, this will just be like a really bad flu season. Well, 65,000 is the number of deaths that occurred in the worst flu season on record since the Great Pandemic. Obviously, that was a whole different thing. That was millions. But 65,000 deaths, and that was actually just 2 years ago. We had 65,000 deaths from the flu here in the United States. That was the worst year on record since we started keeping records. Well, we just passed 65,000 deaths for COVID-19 last week, and we're not halfway through this. So this is not like, it's not like, I know some of your members will say, well, it's just like the flu. It's not just like the flu. Another issue in our region is that we have a lot of counties with very low numbers of positive cases. And we should not be deceived by that, because there's two factors. One is the very high number of asymptomatic infections. So studies show that it's at least 25% or higher of people who are infected who don't even know they're not even sick. They don't feel sick in any way. And so they become carriers of the disease without even knowing it. And then the other reality is that there are just, in order to get tested, even right now, Minnesota is probably one of the best states with because we're blessed to have 3M and the Mayo Clinic here. And so we're getting a lot of testing done, and we're very close to the governor's goal of 5,000 a day. But even with that, the threshold of symptoms that you have to have before you can be tested is pretty high. So I think those two realities, the fact that you got to be pretty sick before you can even get tested, and obviously you can't have a positive test unless you are tested, and the fact that there's so many that are asymptomatic and never get tested suggests that the risk of transmission of this disease is a lot higher than the low case numbers would suggest in our counties. So I think we need to recognize that. We need to recognize that it's deadly for all people, but especially people over 60. I'd like us to affirm together that what we're doing is working. We never went into this. The governor was very clear. We're not doing this to stop the pandemic. We can't do that. But we can limit the pace of the infections so that our healthcare system does not become overwhelmed. And even in the worst parts of the state, where this is in Hennepin County, where it's been the worst, we've managed to keep that from happening. Also, once we begin to go back, we're not going to be the first ones. Faith communities won't be first. Here's the governor's illustration. It shows the dial system, which I think is helpful because we understand we can go forward or backward based on whether or not there's a resurgence. And you'll notice places of worship here under social settings is about in the middle. And so it's a ways out there. So one of the other realities that I think it's important for us to recognize is that we all went into this together. It only took us 2 weeks to go from basically just don't worry about it, wash your hands and we'll be okay, to we're shut down and only 10 people can show up and do a service together. That took 2 weeks and we all went into it together, but we're not going to come out of it together because so many different things are going to factor into your ability to regather. The size of your community. If you've got a really small worshiping group of 50 or less, you're going to get together a lot faster than a congregation that worships 300 or 400 on a Sunday. On the other hand, if 80% of your congregation is in the high risk category, then you've got another set of circumstances that are going to limit that. So it's all going to be different, and it's going to be based on your demographics and the number in worship. It's going to be based on how large your space is and whether or not you can properly social distance people while you're in phase 1 and 2, and even into phase 3. And so, and the other thing we need to recognize is something that I'm sensitive to with an elderly mother who's in an independent living center, is that it's going to be a long time before she can sit with her grandchildren. It's just a reality. And it'll be a long time before people in high-risk categories can return to face-to-face activities. And hopefully by fall, as long as there's no resurgence, but there's the strong possibility that there could be resurgence. And so we need to be prepared as well for what we will do, how we will back up when that happens. So I've asked you to kind of breathe and recognize this will be slow, and to think about it, to work together, to put a smart team in place, and to keep praying. So I want to give you time to respond, because I know that maybe this isn't popular. It's not what you maybe want to hear. But I think it's important for us to recognize this together. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts and your responses.
This is Laura Rude from Zion in Chief River Falls.
Hey, Laura.
Hey, everyone. I do know that this recommendation, this slow back to church recommendation, will not sit well with a lot of members from our congregation. A lot of the feedback that I've gotten, and I don't know about anyone else, is let's just get back to church. This is getting ridiculous, and we need to start worshiping together again. So, I really appreciate your letter today. I did forward it on to a couple of other members on our council, just as a, level set expectations. We'll be having a council meeting this week. But, any advice that you can offer that, stats are great, but not everybody believes them. Many members of even my immediate family, I had to giggle when you said that, you argue with your daughter. you know, we have some conversations with some family members, and they don't believe the stats. Some of them are, you know, they're padded stats for whatever reason. But this is, I feel this is going to be a difficult transition back to church, and especially if we have a resurgence and we have to do this all over again. So I appreciate the words and the encouragement, and just any resources that you can provide, or keeping this group together, and bouncing ideas off each other, I think is very helpful for me anyway. So.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I see Scott's affirmed that as well. And so this is exactly the reason why I wrote the letter, because I know there's a lot of people that are, and hey, I get it. I'm tired of sitting here. You know, I have a nice view, but I like to be around people. I'm an extrovert, and I'm a pastor. I like to, when I preach, I like to see people either going to sleep or crying, or, you know, or responding in some way. And I'm tired of it, and yet I know that I have to keep running this race, because it's going to be a while yet. And so that's why I wrote it, because I know you are, and I hope you'll use it in that way. I invite you to go ahead and throw your bishop under the bus. Just say, the bishop has said that this is, you know, that's one of the functions that synod can have, I think, at times. Hopefully not all the time, but once in a while. So the worst case scenario would be if something that has happened in other countries would be if a faith community was the cause of a major outbreak. And I believe that that's a realistic possibility if our churches move too quickly to regathering. And so I think we should move as fast as science and good public health guidance allows us to move. I don't think we should go any slower than that. I don't think we should say, well, the governor said we can enter phase 1 next week, but I think we should wait another week. I don't think we should do that, because that is just like, that's the same problem with sort of denying the good sources of information. We can't go by our own intuition, and we need to follow the science. And even then, we need to recognize we could still end up having a reoccurrence or a resurgence. But I believe that the data in this state has shown that we've been effective in stopping from happening what has happened. And it's been a horrible scene in New York and New Orleans and parts of Washington State and California, where healthcare systems became overwhelmed, and you had refrigerator trucks parked outside of emergency rooms. You know, we just don't want to go there. And I think, and we certainly don't want to be the ones that were a part of causing that to happen. We want to model for our neighbors, painful as it may be, the kind of behavior that's designed to keep our neighbors safe. So I get it. And let me know if there's something that would be helpful, and I'll try to be as helpful as I can. And we will as a whole staff. Anything to add to that, Pastor Carla?
I'm just going to add a personal note. So I am a person who just hit that 60 mark, which I don't really consider, I don't feel like I'm in danger of catching something because I hit 60. But I am an asthma and allergy sufferer to the point where I've ended up in the ER. And so when when people say, please wear a mask, you're doing that for people like me. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that because I think that the gospel message is not about me, myself, and I. It's about we, and it's about how we can love our neighbors. And that is one way that you can love a neighbor and help protect them. And so that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Carla. And you're also caring for your dad, who he's just slightly older than you are.
Yes,
You
he
know,
is. He's 88.
he's still pretty spry, but and he has some health challenges, and so yeah. Anyway, but I know that I do understand the kind of pushback that you are getting around this, and sometimes some of the arguments behind it. So I'm sympathetic to that.
Bishop Tesh, may I ask
Yes.
a question?
Yes,
This is Laurel at Augustana in Fergus Falls. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, I have a couple of things. First is, what I'm seeing more than the let's get back to worship is, how can we look for loopholes so we can do small things? Like, can our quilters come back? Mind you, almost all of our quilters are 70 plus and high risk. But in phase one, can we do this? In phase one, can we do that? And like we average about 100 people a week for service. But people look at that and say, well, 60 of those people are high risk, so they shouldn't be allowed. So the other 40 of us should be able to come back. What I am asking for, if you guys, when you put guidelines together, is can you look at trying to close some of those loopholes that people that are sitting at home thinking all of this through are finding, so we have strong guidance. I'm not comfortable standing at our church door and saying, you can't come in, you can't come in, you can. I don't think that that's the mission of the church, but I have people that are thinking things through with that reasoning.
Thanks for naming that. Yeah, we'll make it that specific, and if it needs to be more specific, you let us know and we'll clarify it. But it does need to be that specific, and this is going to be the hard part. I'm 1 year away from being in a high risk group, and I'm all about leadership that models things. And not that I'm perfect. I've already screwed it up. I did a video where we weren't standing far enough apart, and so none of us are perfect, but I want to try to model the right behavior. And so, a year from now, your bishop will be stuck at home. And so, if we're not out of this, which I think we will be, but where was I going with that? I think what the hardest part of this is going to be when we get well down the road where we're past phase 2 and we've got fairly healthy people over 60, and they're just going to say, like I probably would, hey, I'm fine. I'm going out. You can't stop me. And there is a certain way in which at some point you just can't stop people. We are a democracy, and we can't make people stay home who are in high risk categories. But at that point, they're putting themselves at risk, not others. So I'm not saying that we won't provide clear guidance about that. I'm just saying that I think we should expect that the day will come where folks who are just a little bit older than me are saying, yeah, okay, thanks for worrying about me, but I'll take my chances. Don't you think?
Yes, I do. I think that any guidance coming from you guys has a little more weight behind it than it does from church councils and pastors, because it's a bigger group. It's not just that we're making this decision about our quilters, or we're making this decision about our Welka copy or Bible study. It's these are the recommendations looking at these high risk groups coming out of the synod, not just in regards to worship.
Yep. Thank you for that.
Thank you for your advice.
Yeah, this is Kathy from First Lutheran in Bemidji, and I think for us, I've been hearing a lot about, because we're such a tourism industry, that here comes opening fishing, Mother's Day weekend, that we have a lot of folks that are business owners in our community, and there's a lot of, well, when can we just reopen slightly? Tourists are going to want to do this, do that. Resort owners that we have that want people to come up, but do we tell them to stay in their cabins and not take the fishing guide? There's just a lot of questions about parameters on that too, because Bemidji triples in the summer with our population. And so there's also fear about all these folks coming in that people that are business owners and resort owners want, and that there's a whole population that's kind of like, please stay home and don't come up this summer. So any
Yeah.
thoughts that you have for that would be appreciated.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think, so I invite you to throw me under the bus, and we all get to throw the governor under the bus. Probably the biggest voice we have, our governor is a former educator. He's a former Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. And I think he's basing these guidelines on solid science, and he's basically following the White House CDC guidelines to a T. And so I think we can just say, yeah, when we get to phase 2, then you can have groups of up to 50, and they got to be 6 feet apart. We can really just keep going back to those state guidelines, and we probably are going to all have to become experts at them, so that when people look for those loopholes, we can say no. But in 6.4-15B, it says, I think we're all going to get a little better at executive orders than we want to be. At the end of the day, for us Christians,
This is Jan from Redeemer in Thief River Falls.
Yes. Go ahead, Jen.
This is Jan from Redeemer in Thief River Falls. Some of us have pastors and musicians and organists that are in high-risk categories, whether it's age or other health-related things. We also have to be cognizant of the fact that we can't ask them to come and be present if they're putting themselves at risk too. So that's another thing to
Yeah, I need to have a conversation with our roster ministers in the high risk category, because I want to understand how they are feeling about this. I know how some are. I know some that are just needing to stay home because they have multiple risks. But what I don't want to see happen is us to create like 2 classes of ministers, those that are in the high risk category and those that are not. That would be unfair and unjust, and not like the Church of Jesus Christ. So, frankly, that's the toughest part of the guidelines that I'm trying to figure out right now. Because I know we have a lot of ministers that are just going to say, hey, I'm called to do this, and I'm going to do it. And if it kills me, it kills me. And then there are others who know that they have underlying health conditions and they're very much at risk. And they know that there won't be any good to anyone if they're sick or if they die. So it's that's a tough one. But the guidelines from the governor have always made an exception for faith leaders whose role it is to lead communities. But that doesn't mean that they're required to do so, and no one should be required to place themselves at risk by their employer. So I don't have an answer. But we will need to have guidance, and that's a conundrum that we're thinking through.
That is something that came up today with a conversation I had. We spoke with a potential interim for our church today that would be considered high risk, and that person didn't have concerns, but yet one of the other people on our executive committee raised, how can we tell our high risk people to stay home when we may have a high risk pastor? And how do we accept that? On one level, it's okay for this person, but we have to tell someone else, we really think you need to stay home, you're considered high risk. And the other piece that came out of that conversation that was worrisome to me from one of our members was the thought of, if this is phased, which I think it has to be, I agree with all of it, the comment that, well, we'll just start worshiping at one of the small churches that can open sooner. So I have a concern for these small churches that think they average 30 to 50 people, that might have, there's probably 10 of those within 20 miles of Fergus Falls where we are, that all of a sudden someone's church isn't operating, but these small ones are, so they get inundated with folks looking for somewhere they can go.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that either. These calls are so helpful to me. I learn so much, and it expands my thinking. But you're right. That could be an issue. We'll have to address that as well. And you're right. It is. How do you, as a faith community, say this is what we're requiring of everyone, but then the leader of our community is, we'll have to think that through. And I just saw this question on the bishop's listserv today too. So everyone's thinking about this now. There's a couple of places in the country that are a little bit ahead of us, the Dakotas and Texas, because their governors are moving quickly to reopen, which, if you live out in West Texas, punching cattle, I guess, is no big deal. But if you're in Austin, Texas, it might not be so good. But anyway, it's something that we're thinking about right now. And just like so much of this, it's kind of happening in real time. But I believe that we'll have this guidance ready a good solid couple weeks before you are making any kinds of decisions to return. So that's a good, thank you for that. Anything else to share?
Mark Oslison here, Rockberry Church at rural Fergus Falls. How are anybody conducting any council meetings or anything at this point in time?
Well, I know a lot of people are using Zoom or telephone, but I'll invite others to chime in how you're doing it.
Because I guess like for us, we would have a number of people that Zoom is probably out of their reach or something, technology-wise type of thing.
Well, with Zoom, so I have a congregation that I'm meeting with up north, and up in Conference 1, and they had a similar issue. But as we thought it through, one option for Zoom is to just dial a telephone number, right? And so as long as I think people have good instructions, everyone knows how to dial a phone number. You might not be able to see people's faces, but you can participate in the conference telephonically, which you can hear and you can speak, and that's the most important part for a meeting.
This is what we use at Central is Zoom, and I mail out the agenda and paperwork, either email it or physically mail it so they have it ahead of time for the council meeting itself.
And this is, I was going to
Go
say,
ahead.
Joan from Good Shepherd in Moorhead. And we have had regular and special held council meetings, and we've always done it on Zoom, and it's worked really well. We also have men's Bible study that's on Zoom, but I would say half of them just use the phone and call in, and the other half use Zoom. We also have daily, it's called Good Shepherd Connects, where people can just call in using Zoom or their phone just to get connected with everybody, to talk about some highs you've experienced, lows, where the Lord has been leading you, where you've seen him this past week. So I would say we have to try to use technology. Not everybody has it. And unfortunately, many who are really isolated and by themselves are older and don't have the use, of Zoom, but they do have a telephone. So I would strongly encourage as much as connecting as you can. We also have been calling our members, all of our members, and especially calling more often our older ones again, so they don't feel so isolated.
Thank you for
Does
that.
anyone have really good Zoom instructions that they have written out for maybe an older population that's, we've done some, but has anyone really worked on a document that's good at instructing, especially our older group, on how to use Zoom that's very step-by-step that we could share with each other?
Yeah, I have access. I'm not sure if I still have it on our resource page, but I can put it up in by the end of the day tomorrow. Really good Zoom instructions, like step-by-step with screenshots on how to do it.
So that would be in the social media section?
Yeah, and if it's not there, I can put it up.
And then Yeah, and also if Zoom, there's to have more than 40 minutes, you have to pay for it. We can get you Google Meet for free. We would just need you or someone from the church to sign up for at Northwest Minnesota Synod at wmnsynod.org email address, and then you could use Google Meet in an unlimited way under that email. Just FYI.
That's Jeff Galley up at Warroad, and we've also used Zoom for both our executive meetings and our regular council meetings. We have one council member that lives out in the country, and he is unable to get the Zoom for computer, but he called in on his phone and it worked fine.
Good. Thanks, Jeff.
This is Tammy Drews from Shalom Lutheran in Alexandria, and we've gone months and months without perfect attendance at our council meetings. And our first Zoom council meeting, we had perfect attendance. It was kind of interesting. We do have one that doesn't have the capabilities, or thinks she doesn't want to even go there. And I just called her on my phone and had her on speaker, and then I was on the Zoom meeting, and she was able to hear and talk, and it worked out just fine with just one that wasn't able. But we did then have perfect attendance, so that was really nice, actually.
Does that mean you get a star as the president when everyone shows up?
I always show up. I don't know. They didn't send me any stars.
You
should talk to Pastor Fleener about that.
I think I should.
I agree. Thanks for this meeting, guys. I enjoy them.
This is Todd Schneeberger at Peace Lutheran in Barrett, and we've used Zoom a lot for special meetings and stuff through this whole time too, and it seems to work very well. And it took a couple meetings to get everybody up to speed on what they were doing and getting on with the audio and the video, but it seems to be working fine, and we're kind of in the same situation where our attendance has been really, really good.
That's great. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to move to one other thing that I think we'll spend a little more time on next time. And I think next time we'll spend quite a bit more time having a generative discussion with ourselves, like we did for about half our time today. Let's see if I can find this document that I wanted to show you. I think it's here. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with disasters. I've had to work a couple of disasters, a natural disaster and a airfield accident in a deployed location. And I would liken what we're experiencing now as a disaster or a crisis. And what this is this is the timeline of the mental and spiritual impact of a disaster. So you have this period of time at the beginning where you're under threat, we can all remember that, when it was like, well, it's in Washington State, but maybe it won't come here. And then it was getting closer, and then we were impacted, and we all kind of went down in the dump for just a short time. But then you'll remember there was that adrenaline rush, and we had a lot of heroic action. People worked really hard to figure out how we can have council meetings, how we can do church online, make phone calls, connect with people. And there was a lot of community cohesion. And I think we got to a point where, in some ways, spiritually and emotionally, we were actually doing better than we were before the crisis. But then comes this little cliff here that we drop off, this disillusionment recoil phase, right? And I think we can make a pretty strong case that we're cascading down this little cliff right now. That's kind of what we're experiencing now. I don't know. What do you think? Where do you think we are on this graph? And I'll stop sharing for a second so we can see each other. So you keep that graph in your, where do you think we're at?
This is Laura from Zion and Thief River. I would agree that we are in that grieving stage. You know, many have been, myself included, been working from home for 6 weeks, been isolated from church for 6 weeks. And, you know, just, I know my personal feeling is definitely one of grief. You know, how are we going to get through this? and you know, grief, confusion. So I love that. It tells a very true story, and that we're not crazy. These are real emotions, and real things that people are going through. And I know myself, I need to be very cognizant of that, not to disregard people's reactions, because they're very real.
Yes. And maybe that push we're getting, that pressure from people, is to just get back to normal. It's actually on the graph. You'll see it in there, the pressure to get back to normal. Go ahead, Roger.
Roger Erickson, Wabonica Lutheran Church in Baudette, Lake of the Woods County. I see us about halfway down that slope. I don't see us at the bottom.
Right.
When we're looking at a month, possibly 6 more weeks of this, I'm a very positive person, but I just don't. I see us about halfway down to that grieving and transition before we start getting back to work, getting back to more social activities, and start that reconstruction part. And I get the part of the let's get back to work, let's do that, and that's a group of people that are unwilling to see what we're up against.
Yeah. I thought this little politics emerge. Not seeing any of that, I don't think, are we?
Yeah, I would think we're closer to the top of that cliff right now than in the middle, because we haven't seen politics emerge, and I think a lot of people haven't realized the impact economically that's going to come from this. A lot of industries, it's going to take them years to recover from this. And, you know, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs and not have one to go back to, because companies are figuring out ways to do their work without people. And I think we're closer to the top. I think this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Yep. Notice that this after you hit bottom here, after the initial high and then the transition phase, that this reconstruction is less steep than either going in or coming out. It just takes a while. And probably the closest thing that maybe we know around here in this part of the world is the floods, the devastating floods that happened. And you know the year better than I do, but you know how long that reconstruction took. And eventually those communities were stronger along the Red River Valley. They came back stronger, but, and you see that here on this graph too. You see that the level at the end is higher than the level you were at going in. But man, it took a long time. Anything else?
Laurel at Augustana. One thing when you talk about grief that we haven't talked a lot about as a group, and maybe we can in the future, is for people that are waiting to bury loved ones and waiting for funerals. We, for example, probably have someone that will be a 300 plus, maybe 400 plus person funeral. And how we help those people, because that's a phase 3 plus kind of funeral. And to give those people a timeline that they can work on in their mind mentally, it just seems like it keeps getting pushed farther and farther. And how do we support those people, and how do we as council presidents, support our pastors and each other in the fact that that group of people might become the most angry with us for not allowing things to happen as they work through their grief.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're very aware of all the delayed grief. In addition to the grieving that we're having of the losses now, there's all that delayed grief that you just referred to. It's one of the reasons why on Saturday of last week, we made the decision as a Synod Council to cancel Synod Assembly this year. So I don't know if you've heard that, but Synod Assembly has been canceled. We're not postponed. And we did that. And first of all, our Constitution allows us to do that. We're only required to have Synod Assembly every 3 years. But this will be the first time I believe it's ever been canceled or even postponed. But it has been canceled, and part of that reasoning is that we're already aware that there's just a lot of things that are getting kicked down the road to the fall, and there's going to be a lot of delayed grief, and we don't need to layer another day-long or 2-day-long meeting on top of that for our rostered ministers and for our presidents and our leaders of congregations, because you're going to have a lot to deal with already. But then there's the spiritual side of how do you help people that are dealing with delayed grief and help them understand. So that's hard. Anything else? I see there's been a request for that graphic. Oh, and the graphic is on the resource page. So.
Kurt Peterson, Dilworth Lutheran Church. At the beginning, when we talked about the Resilient Communities grant, what's the timeline to hear back after submitting an application?
So the committee is meeting once a week, and so you should hear back. I think they're meeting on Thursday. So you should hear back very shortly after that. And the money will come out quickly. Should have it in less than 2 weeks. All right, well, we've reached an hour. And if you hear nothing else, I hope you hear my gratitude for your leadership. When you raised your hand back in January, this probably wasn't what you thought you were signing up for. But I think God had something in mind when God placed you in this role. God's got this, God's got us. And we're going to be stronger when we come through this together. And so I can't imagine anyone else I'd rather be walking through this with than you all and the rostered ministers that I'm blessed to serve with. So thanks. Anything for the good of the cause, Carla or Chris or any other staff members on the call?
No, thank you. Thank you all for your time and all that you're doing for your congregations.
Okay, Pastor Carla, will you pray us out?
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, continually remind us of your steadfast and abiding presence. These are difficult days and difficult times, and we know that our people are hurting in so many ways. We ask that you continue to be the source of light and life and hope for all of our people. We pray that as we turn to love our neighbors who are in need, that we see those who are hungry, that we see those who are frustrated, that we see those who just need a sounding board, that we may be the hands and feet and ears and eyes to help those in need. You promise us life and light. You are the dawning of a new day and a new way of doing things, and we give thanks for those new opportunities. Be with us now and give strength to these leaders as they continue to work through all of these challenges and questions and transitions. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. God's peace be with you, everyone.